Hello, everyone, and welcome to Neurocracy. Today, we're joined by Dr. Rebecca Spencer, professor in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at UMass Amherst and director of the SomneuroLab. Her research investigates how sleep and napping can support learning and brain development across the lifespan, from preschoolers to older adults. Dr. Spencer, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So, my first question for you is what actually got you interested in studying sleep?
Oh, I think I kind of got here by accident. Many people in our field actually train to be
Yeah.
sleep scientists, and
Oh,
I kind of took a different path. So I was interested in how we learn different series of movements. So motor learning is a whole field of study that investigates how our brain acquires sequences of movements. It might be everything from like learning to play the piano or a sequence of moves to hit a tennis ball.
yeah.
And I was studying that kind of learning. And around that time, we were interested in like, how does the brain do that? Looking at
Yeah.
like patients and how do people with damage to certain parts of the brain, how does that change their ability to learn? When there was a really big time result about sleep benefits, the exact task that we were looking at. And it was such a big finding from Matt Walker and Bob Stickold that my memory was it was even on Time magazine's cover. So it was
Wow.
a big deal.
Yeah.
And so for anybody to care about what it felt like a real niche task was a big deal. But for me, it was also like if I'm interested in like how does the brain learn, sleep suddenly had some role in that learning process, and I became interested in how that happened.
Yeah.
And so really I just followed the science from there.
Yeah. So, I actually have a specific question about me. So, I am a Rubik's Cube speed cuber. So, I actually have a Rubik's Cube here. So, I
Awesome.
do like a bunch of algorithms, right? And these are
Yep.
kind of like the sequences of moves that I think you talked about. So,
Right.
how exactly does like the kind of learning maybe go through, like in terms of the muscle memory, maybe? And then maybe how can sleep help impact that too?
Yeah, that's a great example and something that we would often use like videos of speed cubers in some
Yeah.
of our talks.
Oh,
So
wow. Yeah.
what it's doing is we think there's a couple parts of the brain that are really behind that, and the cerebellum plays a role, the basal ganglia plays a role.
Yeah.
But early in learning, I don't actually think sleep has a lot to do with that kind of learning
Right.
that is
Yeah.
really, really low level. So those are parts of the brain outside of the cortex and the cortex is the part of the brain that I think really benefits from sleep. But what happens is there's a kind of a combination of things that is going on when you do your speed cubing. One is a very cognitive aware level, and one of it is like the more low level habitual type of
Yeah.
movement.
I agree.
Anything that's more at the level of awareness benefits from more of our cortex being involved. So, like the hippocampus plays more of a role in explicit learning than it does in implicit learning. So, as soon as you do that speed cubing and maybe you benefit from the surrounding context that you're in, and maybe you more explicitly become aware of something that you're doing that works. At that point, now you're engaging more and more of your higher level brain areas. And
Yeah.
probably starting to engage some going down too when you're like there's decisions being made like as to this is the pattern that's presented to you, what are the move sets of movements I need to make to get there.
Yeah.
So overall I think that as soon as it gets higher in the brain now it's capable of benefiting from sleep because most of that benefit draws on memories being located in the hippocampus.
Oh, yeah.
And that doesn't, for everything we do, it doesn't instantly get into the hippocampus, but the more kind of aware we are, the more explicit our learning is, in the context that we might start to incorporate with the learning that we're doing, now you're going to start engaging the hippocampus and now you're going to start benefiting from sleep.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, how do you like, or what kind of techniques do you use to study this kind of relationship between sleep and learning?
That's a great question. So sometimes we just use behavior. Sometimes I just want to know, does the performance get better over sleep? And maybe it's not that it even improves a lot, but relative to staying awake, you forgot a lot and sleep maybe protected the memory. And sometimes just showing that that performance difference was there between sleep and wake is super important because why bother like putting EEG electrodes on
Yeah.
and putting them in an MRI or something if it turns out that sleep doesn't work in my task. So sometimes
Right.
we just want to look at the behavior. But usually, once we know that there's a question to be asked there, sleep's beneficial, but how? At that point, now we'll bring in kind of our neuro tools. And
Right.
the neuro tools that we use are polysomnography, so the set of electrodes to record brain activity, also eye activity and muscle activity in order to determine the sleep stages. Our lab uses polysomnography like a lot of sleep labs, but one thing we do that might be different than some is we try to pack on a lot of EEG electrodes because we don't want to just know what sleep stage you're in, like right here. We want to know how is that information differing across the brain. So we use pretty high density polysomnography, meaning a
Okay.
lot of electrodes. And then the
Yeah.
other thing we do is in some of our studies, we are interested in either the volume of brain areas or the functional activity in brain areas. And so for that, we'll use the MRI as well.
Okay. Yeah. So as a high schooler, right, we have early high school start times, and that's a big issue that I've talked about a lot on this podcast. And we've I've talked about like the idea of sleep deprived teens having a more difficult time learning and remembering tasks. So what's kind of like your view on that?
For sure. I
Yeah.
think that is a big detriment to our goals of trying to get you to learn well in high
Right.
school, and then we don't let you sleep to the extent that you need to.
Yeah.
And what it's doing is like, I would say, one of the big areas of sleep that is most important is how much slow wave sleep you get. And that's pretty common in our field to say it's not just sleep in general, it's how much slow wave sleep you have that
Okay.
matters.
Yeah.
But what happens is like, yeah, most of your slow wave sleep is early in the first third of the night. But the longer you go through sleep, your sleep is alternating between slow wave sleep and REM and slow wave sleep and REM. And it's the interaction of those two things that does the most magic. And so the fewer of those slow wave sleep and REM cycles you get because I woke you up early to go to school, the less time we've given you for your memory to evolve. If I just gave you the first 3 hours of the night, theoretically, that's where your slow wave sleep is. You'll replay the memories, and that's it. And that might be good for just kind of reminding your brain of what you just studied. But now, if I give you alternating slow wave sleep and REM and slow wave sleep and REM, that means you've not just reactivated the memory, but you've now had a chance to integrate the memory with other things you know. So I always equate that to it's the difference between just studying for the exam and studying for a cumulative exam, where you've
Yeah.
got to take that information that you just learned
Right.
and mix it together with what you already know. And that is benefited by more sleep or this integration of different sleep stages.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to ask about is napping. So could you explain how napping like connects to memory? Because I was really interested by this idea, but I didn't quite like kind of understand like how that works, I guess.
Yeah, and napping is really cool. So on the one hand, napping does everything that overnight sleep does. It's just that you're getting less of it. And so
Right.
when I just told you what this alternating slow wave sleep and REM does, most of the time naps don't have REM because they're too
Right.
short. You need
Yeah.
about 90 minutes to get REM. But just going through stage two and slow wave sleep is beneficial to your memories. It's beneficial to your attention. It's going to give you a lot of those cognitive benefits. And so naps are awesome. And naps are awesome, everything from like the little kids to older adults. And that's good. They can support memory relative to staying awake. And do a lot of those things for us. If I'm advising a high school student, though, I think one of the things that high schoolers and even my college students get wrong is you might binge on sleep in the middle of the day. Let's say a Saturday afternoon, you just binge and you have this super long nap. The problem that that is going to cause is it's going to be harder to fall asleep at night, which is kind of obvious, right? You've
Yeah.
just reduced your sleep pressure a lot. So now I
Right.
can't fall asleep on Saturday night. Well, then I sleep in Sunday morning because it took me a long time to fall asleep.
Yeah.
But then, and so you can see where I'm going with this, you're going to end up in this kind of death spiral of sleep of
Yeah.
like, I can't sleep, I sleep too much, I can't sleep, I sleep too much. And there's a lot of problems with just having that inconsistent rhythmicity to our wake and sleep behaviors. So that's the caution that I put on napping. Napping can be really good, but use them with caution. Don't binge on sleep in the middle of the day,
Yeah.
and use them wisely. Like don't go overboard with how much we're napping.
Yeah. And I know social jet lag is kind of an idea that plays along with that too. But what advice do you have for someone who wants to catch up on sleep, right? Because the idea that they're sleep deprived is apparent, but and there is a need to some extent to be able to make up for that sleep, but also like you said, you can't just binge whenever you want to
Yeah.
because then the problem like just kind of spirals like into itself. So what kind of advice or like techniques should people do, especially high schoolers who can't control the start time? Like
Yeah.
what kind of advice do you have for them?
Well, so first of all, I would say for them that it's good to think about there's actually a couple of different types of naps. You might be
Okay.
taking a nap to make up for sleep debt. Like I slept terribly last night, or maybe I had to get up early for a flight. And so it's fair to say there's a couple hours of napping that might be okay just because you lost sleep before. And that tends to be as long as you don't go too far overboard and you're just kind of making up for a little bit of what you lost, not trying to go over what you lost,
Yeah.
then you're probably still not taking away too much of your sleep pressure for tonight.
Right.
But if you get into some of that more either leisure napping, like it's a Saturday, I don't have anything to do, so I fall asleep on the couch and just let it go, that kind of long nap. Now you didn't have a lot of sleep pressure built up, maybe because you also slept well last night. And now you took away, that's when you're going to take away sleep pressure from tonight, is usually in some of these more leisurely napping scenarios. So I think it's mostly that never try to nap for too much longer than you need to. So put constraints on your napping. Don't nap too late in the day because the closer that nap is to your bedtime, again, the harder it's going to be to
Yeah.
fall asleep. And make sure that your naps have constraints on them in the sense of if you just doze off on the couch, that's not going to be very quality sleep anyway.
Yeah.
And so, what good is that really? It might be giving you a little bit of downtime, but you're probably not going to, progress through too many sleep stages if people are walking in and out. So, think about how valuable that time is for you and the cost benefit too. Is it going to be a big deal if I lose sleep tonight? In a lot of cases, if it's going to throw you off, I would say, yeah, so be careful. Don't let that nap go more than, say, 60 minutes. Some people say 45 minutes. Some people even say 20 minutes.
Yeah.
You can kind of debate that based on how sleep deprived you are. But also, what is your purpose of the nap? I give a lot of talks to athletes, and sometimes they want to take a nap on the bus ride to a competition, and that can be good. But I also say, know how your body's going to respond. If you get to that competition and you're really groggy, because some people take a lot of time to overcome sleep inertia, then they're not going to, it's that nap is probably going to
Yeah.
do more harm than good to their performance. So in that case, know how your body is going to respond to a nap, know how long it takes to really wake you up, which differs across people, and know how to keep it just short enough to not let too much of that sleep inertia or grogginess build up.
Yeah.
So just that knowing how your body responds to a nap is always good before doing it when
Yeah.
there's kind of something important that you're approaching.
Because it is a different way of like responding for everyone, right?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
And then as kind of like a follow-up question here, one of the things that I've always found super cool is like siestas and how like, so this semester I actually have like senior reduced schedule. So I come home maybe like around 1 p.m. and that's like exactly when like I sometimes feel like tired, so I'm able to take a quick nap sometimes. So how does like siesta kind of fall into this idea of like naps or like kind of like evolutionarily like have we always taken naps? Because I'm always interested in like how what was our sleep like 10,000 years ago or like maybe not that long ago, but you
Yeah,
kind
there's
of see where I'm going.
I
So,
have a couple of different answers to this. So first of
yeah.
all, like when you are able to insert it on a pretty consistent basis, now you don't have that kind of back and forth of like long sleep, short sleep, long sleep. You end up just taking a little bit of how much you would sleep overnight and you're
Yeah.
putting it into your day. And if you do that pretty consistently, it
Yeah.
doesn't throw you off as bad. So that's actually the best way to use naps.
Right.
But what you ask about is an interesting question of like, what were we like, in
Yeah.
ancient times?
Yeah.
There was a study done, I think this was by Jerry Siegel or one of those groups that did look at sleep in a tribal people that maybe lives more like we did previously. So not
Okay.
having our modern light exposure, for instance.
Yeah.
And actually, one of their questions was whether they nap. They were interested in
Yeah.
whether you have those middle of the. Some people argue that historically we slept biphasically, where we would wake up in the middle of the night and have this second sleep after that.
Uh,
And they didn't find evidence that we did that. And they also didn't see this like extreme, in my memory at least, is that they didn't see this like extreme nap culture either. So I don't
okay.
think that that was probably what we did. Certainly, maybe that varied by climate, and that there might be some really warm climates where it's more likely to see naps in the middle of at the hottest point in the day. And surely it makes sense that climate could weigh into that, but probably not everybody. If you live in a cold climate, that might be actually harmful to stop and nap in the middle of the day.
Oh,
So, but then if the other thing to know about siesta cultures is,
yeah.
from what we understand in modern Spain and other countries that had the siesta, it's less common in the younger generations. And so you'll still see older generations following that siesta tradition, but not everybody does. And like the younger people aren't kind of living by that afternoon nap. They still might close down the stores and stuff in the middle of the day, but people
Yeah.
aren't actually going and taking a sleep bout in the middle of the day like they might have historically.
Yeah. So that kind of begs the question, I guess. How do you think like napping changes with age? So compared to obviously like, back in preschool, I remember we had designated nap times. And then obviously in high school, you're not going to have designated nap
Yeah.
times. But then later, as you kind of think about like adults and older adults, I think you start to see more. So I'm just curious how that kind of timeline is.
Yeah, and I think as you go through the timeline you just walked through, the reasons for napping change. So in our really young kids that we look at, a lot of that, like the infants, for instance, they just have such a high sleep need that they need to basically be sleeping all day, but waking
Yeah.
up in between, maybe because they need food. And so they have a high sleep need, and it's just broken up into certain bouts because they have to poop and eat now and then,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But then you get into like early childhood, like the preschool age, where they're still napping. And that nap is probably because they have a high sleep need. And from what we look at, we're interested in their hippocampus developing. And our data would say their hippocampus isn't quite big enough to hold a ton of learning. Like kids they're at that age, they're learning everything, right? Like so much of what you learned in preschool. Like you're learning such basic
Yeah.
foundational stuff. And so in order to hold all that, you have to like your little hippocampus is like filling and filling and filling like a bucket.
Yeah.
And then you're like, I can't, it's just gonna keep pouring over outside of my bucket. I've run out of space. So they have to pause, take a nap, empty out their bucket, which is memories going out into the cortex, and then they can keep learning some more, right? So
Yeah.
in that age group, I think why they nap is they just don't have room to hold it all, and they needed to pause and like let some stuff go. So that's why the little kids are napping, is they can only hold so much. They need to pause, take it, and give the memories a break. But then as you said, like naps will start popping back up in adolescence. Those tend to be a bit more of like sleep deprivation naps, making up for lost sleep. And sometimes you might see prophylactic naps. I'm taking this nap because I'm going to go out tonight. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
doing it for more social reasons and
Right.
social pressures on your day, but social pressures on your night. But then when we see the naps show back up in older adults, one thing that can be happening, some of it is just lack of stimulation. But other than that, I think something kind of the opposite of what happens in little kids, where their hippocampus is not growing enough. I think the hippocampus in the brain's ability to keep taking in new things in an older adult can likewise go down as the brain's integrity and efficiency is going down. So those two ends of the spectrum could actually be
Oh, yeah.
related, just
Right.
by the fact that you've got development on one side, and then you've got this loss of efficiency and loss of brain integrity on the other end that could be underlying that.
Yeah.
Older adults, we also have to be careful, and even in kids too, but we have to be careful that they're getting the appropriate light. So some older adults are also falling asleep because they are not able to regulate their melatonin well enough.
Oh,
You just think of like melatonin as something that's going to tell me when to be awake and when to sleep, help me set my clock with light exposure. Older adults are often not getting outdoor light, and their indoor light is not regulated in the same 24-hour
Right.
way that outdoor light is. And so that can be harmful to their circadian rhythms, which is then harmful to how efficient your sleep is.
Yeah. So, one of my last questions for you is among like your research and all the stuff you've done in the sleep field, what is like one thing that has surprised you quite a bit, or maybe surprises other people, you think?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I love our finding with like the relationship between how the brain development develops and why we're or when we're napping. I think
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. But the
Yeah.
other thing I would say is like one of our early fun studies was you often hear this phrase that you should sleep on it to make a decision.
Oh yeah.
And it's stuff like that we just take for granted. Like, at least when we did it, I would argue nobody had really looked at that question of whether
Yeah.
sleep benefits decision making. And so I don't know that the outcome was like super surprising because we found that, yeah, sleep does benefit decision making, but
Yeah.
more just that like all of these like super basic functions of sleep, like that we're spending so much time doing, and yet we know so little about it. And just even that one thing that like we don't actually know at that point in time that sleeping on it made a difference. And even still, you could ask that question in so many different ways. And so that's the thing about the field in general that surprised me by not being a sleep researcher by training.
Right.
Is that how much how unknown the whole space is and how much there is to be done.
Yeah. And then my last question for you is when you're looking forward into the next like 5, 10 years, what are some of the discoveries that you hope your lab will make, or maybe just sleep in general? What are you like excited about the most?
Yeah, I guess what excites me the most, so I had mentioned that we use a lot of EEG electrodes
Yeah.
while you're sleeping and not just focusing on one point. And some of that is because we all like I think there's a problem with just assuming that what you look at like one electrode is the same in
Right.
across the brain. And more, what I think is one of the hottest and coolest areas of sleep research is this idea of local sleep. And so we know in animals that their waking brain could have like a patch of sleep, or you could have a whole hemisphere
Oh,
asleep while the other one's awake.
yeah.
And now some research is even showing that if your mind is wandering, you're in class and your mind is wandering, that is actually your waking brain has a patch of sleep in it. And so that idea of how we had made the mistake for a long time of being like, you're either asleep or you're
Right.
awake. And now we're
Yeah.
looking at like either you're in this sleep stage or this sleep stage. And we're all basing those declarations off from like an electrode. But
Right.
now that we have the tools to look across the brain while we're sleeping, and now the knowledge to not just assume this is all homogenous, we can now say, let's break that down. Like, yeah, this area might be asleep and in slow wave sleep, but is that what this area is doing? And if not, what are those reasons for them being different? And I
Yeah.
think that now that we've kind of accepted that, well, it makes sense that not all areas of our brain are doing the same thing while we're awake. Now we're accepting not all our areas of your brain are doing the same thing while you're sleeping. That opens up a whole new world of how we're thinking about the brain during sleep, which is super cool.
Yeah. Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Spencer. It was really nice to hear you talk, and especially the nap stuff is stuff I've always kind of wondered about, but it was really great to be able to talk to an expert and actually learn. And I think what you said today, especially about like the timing of the naps, is especially relevant to me. And what you said about kind of like this idea of where you take long naps and then you lose some of that sleep pressure and then it becomes harder to fall asleep. And then the next day, the cycle continues is very relatable to me and a lot of other people, a lot of my
Yeah.
friends too. So I think the kind of information and advice you gave is super important for that.
Awesome.
So
Yeah, it's good to get that out there.
yeah, thank you.